Welcome to the online Student Organization Supplemental Funding Request Training. This module is designed to provide you basic information about requesting funds from the Student Government Association Finance Committee. Undergraduate and graduate students pay a fee established by SGA. The funding that student organizations request through this process comes from those student fees. Premier organizations, which includes SGA and Student Events Board, receive a set amount of funding every year based on a formula, and then Finance Committee determines how remaining funds are used. Any money that an org has not spent by June 30th is returned to the pool to be awarded next year. Because the source of the funding student organizations request is student fees, it's important that any money received is spent in a way that benefits students as a whole. For this reason, student organizations should only request money for events and initiatives that are conceived and planned by students and that are reasonably open to the student body. Exclusive events, such as those only open to organization officers, should not be funded through student fees. Rather, student organizations should find other sources of money, such as fundraising, for events and projects that have intentionally limited audiences. There are specific policies in place to prevent misuse of fees, but it is this overall philosophy that forms the spirit of these policies and underpins the funding decisions that the SGA Finance Committee will make. To request funding during the supplemental funding period, student organizations must be fully registered and trained. This means having your organization fully staffed by students and approved by CSEI before the supplemental funding deadline, as well as completing all necessary training for the relevant officers. Organizations that do not have a complete set of officers, are not in active status, or that did not complete all required training will be ineligible to request these funds. Additionally, a group's president or treasurer must complete this training module, including achieving a passing score on the test at the end, for a group's request to be considered. Funding requests from groups that have out-of-date registrations, outstanding training requirements, or outstanding issues related to their organization finances will not be considered either, so make sure your organization has kept things up to date. This training is intended to give an overview of the supplemental funding process. Officers should keep in mind that there are ongoing expectations for managing the organization's finances appropriately and ensuring continued access to funds after the money is requested. Many of these responsibilities are discussed in detail during the financial expenditure training required of presidents and treasurers, which is completed in late summer and early fall. But here's a brief summary. As you begin to think about your group's budget for the supplemental period, it's important to know what direction your group wants to go and make your budget part of the plan to get you there. While the specific events that you will host and the distinct initiatives you will take on are important, it's also important to align your budget plan with the larger overall goals that you want to accomplish as an organization in the upcoming year. You will want to prioritize your funding requests with those goals in mind. Coming up with your plan should be a collaborative effort. Current, outgoing, and past officers and advisors can provide historical information about what your group has needed or requested in the past. Current membership and incoming officers may have new ideas for the group. Before drafting the budget request, you'll need to work together with these groups to determine what gets prioritized into the budget and what, if any, initiatives need to be set aside or funded in some other way. Translating your group's plan into a budget request requires that you outline the financial resources you'll need and that you explain why those resources are necessary for your plan to succeed. Try to anticipate what questions someone who's not familiar with your organization might have about the details of your request. Provide well-researched information upfront that supports the request by speaking to those details. Also be sure that the items you are requesting funding for are permissible under the policies governing what student fee money may be spent on. SGAFC evaluates your request, along with the requests of all other student organizations, in a viewpoint-neutral manner. This means that the committee will not give preference to one group's mission, purpose, or viewpoint over another's when awarding funding. The committee works hard to provide similar levels of funding to similar requests across organizations. When the committee needs to make tough decisions, they start by funding the requests that both align with each group's mission and provide maximum benefit to students as a whole before moving on to requests that are less essential to a group achieving its mission or that don't have clear benefit to the student body as a whole. The committee may also consider how funds were utilized in prior years when making funding decisions. If a group did not utilize large portions of its budget award in the prior year or needed to reallocate most of the budget away from the areas in which it was originally requested, it is wise to inform the committee of why this occurred, or else it may appear that money awarded to the group is likely to go unused and/or that the use is uncertain. The committee also looks at objective data, like your group's membership numbers, events and event attendance numbers, and past financial history, when it can inform their decision-making in an appropriate way. Campus Groups is the official record for most of this data, so it is a good idea to register events in Campus Groups and record attendance there as well. If you have not done so in the past, you should begin doing so and may wish to provide past data to the committee by attaching it to your budget request as a standalone document. Your budget should reflect how your group plans to achieve its mission and goals throughout the rest of the year while enhancing the UB student experience overall. Requests that contain only one event, which is unrelated to an organization's core mission and which only targets the organization's own members, are less likely to be funded than requests with multiple events clearly tied to an organization's mission and holding a broader appeal. It's up to you to provide the specifics and details that help the committee understand how the request and its components meet those criteria. It is also beneficial to request funds primarily for those items within each event that clearly support the purpose and goals of your organization, rather than for portions of the event that are non-essential. Funding to lure students into attending an event via an unrelated incentive, like food, are often the first cuts the committee makes. To be clear, while attendance incentives, including food, can be a component of successful events, making them the focus of a budget request presents a challenge to the committee when money is tight. Core aspects of events, rather than incentives, are likely to be prioritized for funding. And as stated previously, be sure your request is aligned with policies and includes reasonable cost figures that are based on research. Each year, the students involved in the funding process review policy and recommend changes. In this section, we will review some key policy components. This is only a summary, and it is very important that you review the entire policy before requesting funds. A link to resources, including the policy, will be provided at the end of this training. Not following the policy can result in denial of parts or all of your funding request. SGAFC needs to be consistent in the awarding of funds across organizations. For that reason, the policy includes some suggested maximums for very common items. These limits serve as guidelines for the committee when making decisions. The committee often awards less than the maximum suggested. It is rare that the committee awards more. If your group is requesting more than the maximum for one of the items listed, it's important to include detailed objective information about the unique needs which have led to that request. For the committee to consider your request differently than a similar request from another organization, they need a solid justification that includes facts and supporting data. We would really like to host this event. It's neither objective nor exceptional, so plan your budget carefully and only request the amount of funding you truly need. In addition to the suggested maximums discussed on the last slide, the committee is also bound by a few specific restrictions which cannot be overridden, even if a justification is provided. When requesting items that have these restrictions, be sure to demonstrate to the committee that you've taken the restrictions into account. For example, when requesting money to buy t-shirts, you should disclose how many t-shirts you plan to purchase so the committee can be assured you aren't going over the $15 per shirt cap, or that if you are, you're funding the excess amount from some other source. It's also important to be aware that the committee is prohibited from funding events that, by their design or definition, hold a greater benefit for the members of an organization itself than for the student body as a whole, unless there is extra funding available after all other requests are considered. These types of events, which include inductions, graduations, and appreciations of officers or advisors, are best funded by other sources of money, such as fundraising or member dues, whenever possible. The use of student fee money for fundraising activities is also restricted. In general, organizations are expected to utilize money raised during a fundraiser or money previously fundraised to offset the cost of fundraising drives. In some instances, the committee will grant a nominal amount of seed money for a group to do a fundraiser. However, this is evaluated carefully and depends on the specifics of the initiative and the amount of funding available. Anytime a group is requesting money for an event or initiative that includes raising funds for itself or someone else, detailed information about the fundraising components must be provided as part of the budget request, even if the committee is not being asked to pay for the specific fundraising activity. Failure to provide that information may lead to denial of funding. There are also some items that cannot be funded at all using funds awarded by SGAFC. These items are considered incompatible with the purposes of student fee money, or are prohibited by state laws and policies, or both. Requests for funding which relate to these items will be denied outright and cannot be appealed. On the other hand, there are items that may receive special consideration from the committee. Co-sponsorships of events and initiatives with other UB student organizations may receive funding above and beyond the suggested maximums. If the budget requests of all groups involved demonstrate their contributions to the event or initiative proposed and if funding is available. Each group involved should clearly label their co-sponsorship items as such. Because this consideration is provided to encourage student organizations to co-program with each other, the special consideration is applied only to co-sponsorships amongst 2 or more UB student organizations. Co-sponsorships with campus offices and departments and co-sponsorships with outside agencies and organizations are not eligible for special consideration in this manner. Marquee events are another type of expense that may receive a special level of funding. To qualify as a marquee event, the events must be critical to the mission of the organization proposing it. The organization must designate within the budget request that the event is their marquee event and may only designate one such event per year. Marquee events should hold appeal for the student body as a whole. Events that by design or definition hold a greater value for members of the organization itself than for the student body at large cannot be designated marquee. When requesting special consideration for co-sponsored items or marquee items, groups are strongly encouraged to provide data regarding the event, especially if the event has been held previously. This could include sign-in or attendance data, satisfaction survey or evaluation results, interest survey results, or other information which the group believes demonstrates the impact and reach of the event for the UB student body. Since SGFC only has so much money to award, it is ideal when an organization has multiple sources of funding for its activities. However, it is also important for SGAFC to know when and how those other sources are involved in the things you are asking the committee to fund. Anytime the committee is asked to fund an event or activity that will raise money, no matter who the money is being raised for, it is expected that the student organization will provide significant detail about the fundraising that will take place and who is paying for what. This applies even if the fundraising is only a portion of the event. Likewise, whenever an organization plans to fund an event or activity partially through SGAFC funding and partially from other funds, it is expected that the organization will disclose how each source of funding is being used. Next, we will cover how to gather the information for your budget request and how to submit it. So that SGAFC can consider all requests on an apples-to-apples basis, a standard request structure is required. The next few slides will demonstrate how to input your request into campus groups utilizing the required structure. Detailed information about the structural requirements is located in the policies and resources online. There's a link to those policies and resources at the end of this training module. To access your budget, you'll need to navigate to the budgeting section of your organization's campus groups portal. The budgeting option is located within the side menu under Money. If you cannot access this portion of your portal, it may be because you're not registered. Please reach out to CSEI at engagement@ubolt.edu for assistance. Once inside the budget, select the correct budget period from the dropdown, circled here and marked with a red 1. Then you'll start building your budget items individually by selecting Create Budget Request, circled here and marked with a red 2. Please note that this creates one budget item, which can look like a single event or with multiple line items, or one bulk purchase like t-shirts or advertising, but should not encompass all of your events or purchasing for the entire year. Each event should have its own budget item. When you reach the budget form, provide a name for your event or purchase in the first box. Use a distinctive title so your budget item stands out from others you create. You will also need to provide a brief description of what this event will be, who it will serve, and what you will be purchasing. In the more detail section, provide as much relevant detail about your event as you can. If you're requesting catering, how many participants do you intend to feed? If your event is in person, where will you be holding it? Once your request is finished, including the required documents for your first item, select Next to add the financial details of your request. When selecting a category for each budget item, keep in mind that expenses related to on-campus events, events in the Baltimore area, and virtual events should utilize the activity category. Most of the budget items your organization creates are likely to be in the activity category. The equipment category should be used for durable items that do not relate to a specific event and that will be kept by the organization for ongoing use. Promotions and marketing is the category you will use for expenses related to the advertising of all of your events and any general promotional expenses like t-shirts. The supplies category should be used when purchasing general supplies for organization use over time. If the supplies being purchased relate to a specific event, it's best to include them as a line within the event itself rather than in a separate supply item. Finally, the travel category should be used for any activity which will require transportation due to the location of the activity. This is how a budget item with multiple item lines should look when complete. In this instance, we can see that the organization is requesting money for an on-campus event, which will include a payment to a speaker, catering, parking passes, advertising costs, and some supplies. The notes, while brief, provide all the information the committee will need about the nature of the purchases. This event will not be using any revenue funds, but if a group intended to use any of their revenue to pay for part of or all of the purchase, they would include that amount in the amount financed by group section. Once you have saved your budget item, it will look like this in your budgeting portal. This is a complete, correct, and submitted request. In campus groups, there is no final submit button to submit your entire budget for the year, so be sure that each individual budget item is correct and saved. The allocations process involves evaluation of your budget request by the student members of the SGAFC. When determining how much money to grant, the committee reduces or eliminates specific line items within your request and provides the reasons for which they did so. They are not permitted to make bulk cuts to a budget request that aren't tied to a specific line. Groups then have an opportunity to appeal by asking the committee to reconsider any cuts later in the fall. Each group is given the option of appearing before the committee as they consider requests. However, your appearance before the committee is not mandatory, and choosing not to appear before the committee will not have a negative impact on your request. The person who submits the budget request will be emailed about the option to appear before the committee. If your organization chooses to appear, be aware that you will only have about 10 minutes in which to both describe your request and answer any questions the committee has. Many organizations forego an appearance and wait to meet the committee in person until the appeals process. Doing so allows the organization to focus their time with the committee on the items that were not funded, rather than to cover everything more broadly, and saves the group from having to come before the committee twice. That said, if your group's request is especially complex or unusual, you may wish to appear before the committee to explain those portions when they first consider your request. Once the committee has finalized the awards of all groups, each person who submitted a budget request will receive notice of the outcome. Only the person who submitted the request is notified, and it is that person's responsibility to disseminate the information to others in the organization if needed. All money awarded to the group becomes available on January 1st. Supplemental funds can only be used during the spring semester. Instructions for appealing decisions are included in the notification email. Groups that wish to appeal decisions made by the committee can do so in 2 stages. The first stage involves appealing back to the committee itself, essentially asking the committee to reconsider. Groups that do so will be invited to the committee's appeal meeting to discuss their appeal, or may provide their appeal in writing if they wish. Groups that wish to appeal further may file a second appeal with the director of CSEI. Since allocation decisions are made based on how your group indicated it planned to spend its money, it is expected that your group will spend the money as budgeted. Changing the type of event you plan to host or the type of expenses you plan to pay for an event usually require that your group reallocate funds to cover the unbudgeted costs. SGAFC knows that plans do sometimes change, so they allow groups to reallocate up to 25% of their entire budget awarded for the year by simply completing a form. As long as the changes don't violate a policy, amounts under this limit can usually be reallocated in a few business days. However, SGAFC also seeks to ensure that groups aren't reallocating large amounts into items that the committee might not have funded in the first place. For this reason, moving more than 25% of your budget requires that the committee review and approve the request. Since the committee only meets once per month, reallocations of that magnitude require advanced planning by the group if they become necessary. All requests must be submitted through campus groups by the deadline shown here and must not exceed the amount shown here. The committee does not consider budget requests submitted after this deadline. Organizations are strongly encouraged to submit requests in advance of the deadline to minimize the chance of unexpected issues interfering with a timely submission. Additionally, requests submitted over the requested amount may not be reviewed at all. Next, you'll need to navigate to a brief exam, which you'll need to pass in order to receive credit for this training. However, please take a moment to write down the website on the screen. When you have finished the exam, you'll want to go to this website to find additional resources, policies, and how-to guides, which will help you. Go to involvement.uvault.edu/orgmoney and follow the navigational tabs to access all the information you need to manage financials for your organization. You're almost done. Please see the link in your supplemental funding email to take the exam that proves you took this training and passed the quiz. Once you have taken the quiz and passed, you are eligible to submit a supplemental funding request. This training is not complete until you have passed the exam.